beyond the discourse.
Beyond politics, beyond the shallowness of everyday politics. Etejah News Channel. The truth fears no questions.
Hello and welcome to a new live episode of our weekly show, Global Insight. I'm your host, Hasan Youness. Russia, Ukraine and the West have reached a compromise to try to ease the Ukrainian crisis in a glimmer of hope for the former Soviet republic that risks splitting into two. Vladimir Putin has secured key concessions from Ukraine and its Western supporters as the Kremlin was offered a central role in determining the future of its neighbor and former client state. Pro-Russia protests gained momentum in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine after Crimea declared independence from the former Soviet Union. Since then, the problem escalated in that boiling region and the New World Order is put at stake. To discover deeper insights about this topic, among others, I'm glad to welcome Professor Rock-Antoine Mehanna, Dean of the Faculty of Business Administration and Finance at Etejah University, and a strategic analyst as well. Hello, Dr. Rock. And I'll be joined from Ukraine with Mr. Majid Akil, who is a writer and political analyst. Before starting the discussion, we'll go with a report which sheds light on Geneva talks yesterday, and we'll proceed.
Pro-Russian protests gained momentum in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine after Crimea declared independence from the former Soviet state and formally applied to become part of the Russian Federation following a referendum on March 16th. Since the problem escalated in that boiling region, which necessitated Thursday's Geneva talks. Following the Geneva talks, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrei Dechtia, US Secretary of State John Kerry and EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton said there was agreement that all illegal military formations in Ukraine must be dissolved and that everyone occupying buildings must be disarmed and leave them. Vladimir Putin has secured key concessions from Ukraine and its Western supporters, as the Kremlin was offered a central role in determining the future of its neighbor and former client state. The foreign minister said that there would be an amnesty for all anti-government protesters under the agreement, and talks of inclusivity, possibly a suggestion that Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine might be granted more autonomy. These steps will be overseen by monitors from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. US President Barack Obama called the deal promising, but said the question remained whether Russia would now use its influence, previously exerted, quote, in a disruptive way, to restore order in Ukraine. Mr. Kerry described the talks as, quote, a good day's work, but said words had to be turned into actions, and that he would have no choice but impose tougher sanctions on Russia if Moscow failed to demonstrate that it was serious about lowering tensions in Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow has no plans to send troops to Ukraine, as such a move is against the fundamental interests of Russia. Even as the world's top diplomats were drafting a tentative accord to de-escalate tensions in Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin was on national TV declaring Russia's historical claims over Ukrainian territory, reiterating a threat to use military force and generally sounding a defiant, even mocking tone towards the United States. Mr. Putin, appearing cool and confident, referred repeatedly to southeast Ukraine as New Russia. According to analysts, Mr. Putin's willingness to challenge the West aggressively also reflects his relatively strong position, militarily in post, Soviet space, and politically on the domestic front.
Hello again to Global Insight. Hello, Professor Rock-Antoine Mehanna. I'm glad to have you in this episode. In fact, yesterday, Geneva has witnessed the talks between Russian Foreign Minister, Ukraine's Foreign Minister, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, in addition to the EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton. Were these talks up to your expectations?
In fact, the general mood was a kind of a step forward regarding the de-escalation and diffusing the tensions. The escalation has actually been, as everybody signed, including the foreign prime minister or Russian prime minister, has signed. And now, so the general mood is there is a kind of de-escalation of the Ukrainian crisis, but there is also caution and there is kind of skepticism from the West and from the US, as we have heard yesterday with President Obama mentioning that, you know, it's wait and see. There is a kind of a skepticism until actions have to be proven, not only the signatures and talks. In parallel to that, like we have heard in the report, and we know that President Putin at the same time, and in parallel, while his foreign minister signed that on the Geneva Agreement, he was at the same time trying not to quit the military option. So the military option, and also raised the claims about Russian claims over Ukrainian territories.
Does Russia want a deal?
In fact, what happened is it's not only a deal. There is a change in the mood since December 2011. Prior to that, and especially with the President Medvedev era, there was a lot of cooperation with the West and especially mainly with the US. After the Duma elections in 2011, the Putin administration accused the US, at the time was Foreign Minister Hillary Clinton, accused her and the US of interfering in the issues of the fraudulent elections that were claimed to be by the West, that there were fraudulent elections in 2011. And that things took a different stand. There were more divergence vis-a-vis the Syrian issue. And so there was kind of started things really taking a different stand since then. I think
but
later
despite
on,
the divergent views regarding the Syrian issue, we have witnessed some proximity in the relation between Russia from one side and the West, the EU and the US from the other side, after the P5+1 talks with Iran, after cancelling the strike on Syria. So we have witnessed some proximity. However, maybe the problem of Ukraine has widened the gap between Russia and the West. We'll have some insights from Mr. Majid Akil, who is joining us from Ukraine. Mr. Majid Akil, Dr. Rock-Antoine Mehanna tried to tackle the issue from a strategic perspective, tracing it a bit historically regarding the relation between the US from one side and Russia from the other. If we want to go to a more micro level, to emphasize on Ukraine itself, what are the underlying reasons which are contributing for such division in Ukraine? To talk later about the Geneva talks.
Okay. You want to start with the Geneva talks or with the reasons?
Let's talk about first about the underlying reasons which are triggering this division. Then we will talk about the anticipated solution which was offered by the Geneva talks. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's say first that Ukraine in general, after it got its independence, 23 years of independence from the Soviet Union wasn't sufficient enough for the majority of Ukrainian national identity, because of many factors, because of geographical factor, because of demographical factor, because of cultural, civilizational factors. Ukraine shares borders with 7 countries. Ukraine has different components, especially the Russian components, Russian minority, which are between 17 to 20% of the Ukrainian population. And those minority form majority in some regions, like the newly independent Crimea. Another thing, we have cultural and civilizational division, because we have people who are still influenced by the Soviet heritage and loyal to this heritage, and we have people who are influenced by the cultural invasion, European, Western, American. So I can see that there were always a fertile ground for this division in Ukraine. Yes, things were calm, looked to be calm, but I can say that any person with far strategic sight can clearly know that it is only the calm before the storm. This storm, we can say that it started by President Viktor Yanukovych. Viktor Yanukovych, the ousted president, has stated one day that he stated several times that the geopolitical balance is the main pillar of the Ukrainian policy. But he was the man who must destroyed this balance. He thought that he was playing politics and trying to be neutral and trying to build a bridge between the United States, between Europe and Russia. But in fact,
but he was trying to play on the two ropes, trying to get the aid from the European Union and trying to establish good relation with Russia. Do you think that Russia can work with such an ally as Viktor Yanukovych?
Yanukovych thought that he can enter the European family and still get the support and backing from Russia, which is an unrealistic idea. This cannot be, because Russia wants a strong ally and the European Union want someone who is totally with them, get totally out of being allied with Russia.
So can you continue this trace of ideas in the era after Viktor Yanukovych? The division, the underlying reasons for this division are still there, yeah?
Yes, for sure, because Viktor Yanukovych only started this series of developments because he played on the feelings on his people, and the crisis started from here. He appeared to the Russians as a weak ally, he appeared for the Europeans as an obstacle, he appeared for his supporters as a weak leader, and he appeared as a criminal and as a dictator for people who were against him. And then he led to those series of developments that led for him to be overthrown by his opponents, and then a new government came. And in spite of the fact that this government is only a transitional government, but from the first day and from the first hours, it opened a very huge gate for the continuance of this series of factors that will lead Ukraine to division. The first projects that the parliament tried to adopt in its after overthrowing Yanukovych just after a few hours was a project of a law to cancel the Russian language as a second official language in the country. So people in the eastern regions, people who are Russians by ethnic Russians, or people who have Russian culture or Russian speakers, it is their right to feel that they are threatened and that there will be a campaign against them.
Abdel Majid, sorry for the interruption. I'll get back to you shortly to continue this thread of thought. Dr. Rock-Antoine Mehanna, we've heard from Abdel Majid that there is a division demographically, culturally, from a civilizational perspective within Ukraine. Do you think that a united Ukraine can still exist, bearing in mind that it is characterized by being that mosaic?
I think in addition to what he mentioned, I think there is another issue regarding the Ukraine, from the Russian perspective, regarding the Ukrainian entity itself. After 2004 Orange Revolution, what happened is a lot of actual plans and ambition for critical reforms that were expected to be done. What happened, in fact, is later on, then allegations started for corruption, for the Ukrainian regime actually being involved in corruption. Another thing, no critical reforms were actually implemented. In addition to the southern and the eastern, that they have the concentration for Russian speakers and Russian natives for that kind of Russian ethnic
which
regions.
Constitute around 20%, as Abdel has said.
Yes, and the point over here, there were issues about maybe not well represented, some reform not maybe well protected. That's from the other perspective.
Yeah, they felt that they were threatened.
Correct. And in fact, the other issue from the Russian perspective and the Putin regime after the 2011 issue that has happened, being accused with flawed elections, then things started taking a different shape. Although he joined in with the Iranian issue for the nuclear weapons, signed in with the West. However, things started taking a different road, and in fact, he wanted to confront the US hegemony. And that's why we see a lot of alliance and closer proximity to China and to the BRIC countries.
Yeah, sure.
Having said that, the issue right now, it's still at stake. I mean, regarding, if you look at the east right now, we have 40,000 Russian troops still on the border of the Ukraine. Now, even there is an issue, and here what the West, or what the outcome of the Geneva, from the Western perspective, they're still worried that might be, it's a kind of a pep talk, or maybe it's in a vision, because troops are still the illegal armed groups. What they're asking is to abandon their weapons. They will give them amnesty, but also to vacate the buildings that they have occupied. That said, the leader of the pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk, he's actually saying, hey, we did not sign. That's the Russian foreign minister who signed that. So we're aware of that. Is it by agreement, or is it something really they don't have? Of course, they have the influence, and Russia has the control over the separatists. But that's, and by the same token,
they have control, but the separatists also have their autonomous demands.
In fact, and that's what exactly, that's correct, because the Geneva Agreement, at the same time, what the Ukrainian has actually put up front is they have promised with critical reforms and more autonomy to the eastern, specifically to the eastern part of Ukraine, where the mass of the, for the pro-Russian, whether Russian-speaking or Russian natives over there, they have promised for also more representation, more protection, and basically more autonomy for that, given this. But that said, by the same token as well, there is the issue, and now they have the 100 monitors from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They will actually, to maintain that issue.
The OSCE.
Yes, but what actually worries me, or what from a strategic perspective, is although they may have the influence over the eastern and the southern pro-Russian, let me say the Russian ethnic regions, things might actually spill over to other parts for totally different goals.
We'll be talking about the spillover, we'll be talking about the repercussions of Geneva talks, but right after the first break. A break, and we'll be back.
Pollution and climate change, medicine manipulation, genetically modified food, the destruction of wildlife, and corporate exploitation. These are all part of a new terrorism threatening our future.
Eco-terrorism, global awakening to a world under threat.
Britain and France especially were competing with each other.
And the film tells the story of the building of the separation wall, or the apartheid wall, whatever you want to call it.
That the 1% are dominating. The societies that are built for the benefit of very few wealthy people.
What you read in here actually shapes what's happening today. So the politics, the double dealing, the backdoor dealings, the lies, the blatant lies.
And it does that firstly by, in the first half, telling the story of various families and how they were expelled from their homes through 1948 and then 67.
It's called decisive. It's not suggesting that every decision will be perfect or that you'll be able to do it immediately.
Hello again to Global Insight. I'll go directly to Ukraine with Mr. Akil. Mr. Akil, before the first break, you talked about the underlying reasons for the division, and you had traced the historical roots and the demographic and the cultural ones. However, I want to ask you about these underlying reasons for the division and their particularity in the aftermath of the Crimean's referendum.
After the Crimean referendum, the same story which started in Crimea started to happen in the southern and in the eastern and southeastern regions in Ukraine. Here, and in spite of the fact that the four interested parties had met yesterday in Geneva, but it was like a part of political maneuver. Let's say that Russia now is playing the same game and adopting the same strategy, proxy war, the same strategy that the US used to adopt in Syria and in general in the so-called Arab Spring. So, in spite of the agreement and the roadmap that was agreed yesterday in Geneva, it is just a part of political maneuver. And I believe that because of the fact that there will be elections after 1 month, so all sides will still be escalating till that point. And now people, rebels in those areas, separatist rebels, are saying that they didn't sign on anything. The Prime Minister of Russia signed, and they refused this agreement. So this game will continue, I think, till the elections.
So, you are skeptical. You are skeptical about the results of the fruitfulness of the results of Geneva talks.
As I said, I think it is just a political maneuver till next elections. Till next
so
elections.
The problems will continue to be escalating until the 25th of May, as you're saying.
I think 25th. Yes, I think this is a message from President Vladimir Putin. If either a pro-Russian president will come to power again in Kiev to get the central and full rulership of Ukraine, or the other scenario, if a pro-European president will get power by elections, then the eastern and southeastern regions will separate from Ukraine, like what happened in Crimea. I think this is the message, and we should wait.
But Mr. Abdel Majid, the results of the talks have led to certain concrete results, and these results will be overseen by monitors from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. So what role will the OSCE have? It will only have such observatory status with no force, or what?
I think so. And anyway, as I said, it is just 1 month from now till next elections. So till they will start their work on the ground.
But in 1 month, it's more than 1 month. It's 1 month and a week. In more than 5 weeks, the problems might escalate further. So don't you fear that?
Yes, as I said, I fear of escalation, because always before those important occasions like elections, everyone wants to improve his conditions to get into the elections with better conditions. So we have 3 scenarios in the elections. The first scenario is a pro-European president, and this would lead to more escalation in the eastern regions, and to a scenario which is similar to the scenario that happened in Crimea. The other scenario, if a pro-Russian candidate would win the elections, like Mr. Dubkin, who is the governor of Kharkov, this would lead to separation in the western regions. Some regions would join Poland or Romania or something like this.
Yeah, I'll discuss these scenarios with you. I've taken notes about these scenarios. I'll discuss them further in a while. Professor Mehanna, do you think that Russia is having the upper hand in the negotiations, in any negotiations, especially in Geneva talks yesterday? Who had the upper hand?
No doubt that they had the upper hand, given their military. They are on the ground, and their military. We have 40,000 troops on the eastern side. They said that they're doing exercises, but in fact they're just waiting for
the NATO, maybe.
The issue is it's not only the military confrontation. In fact, none of these, or both parties, are willing to go into military purpose.
They can't afford.
But it's about how much investment they have put. Russia actually has the Crimea, and the annexation of Crimea to Russia was a priority for them, given that's the only, if strategic actually access to the Black Sea.
Sure.
And so they have a lot of priority on that. Well, it's very similar to the Syrian issue. The US does not have the same priority as Russia has it as far as the Syrian issue. So they have invested, Russia has invested much more in Syria. But now with Crimea, they even have more priority than in Syria.
Because they have more stake there. It's in their backyard, geographically, demographically,
So they have put a lot of investment in this, and that's very important priority
and
for
there is
them.
a lot of potential investment for the future, maybe as well.
And what, like you mentioned earlier, what about the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is going to do? They're going to monitor, but they only just have 100 monitors all over Ukraine.
Yeah.
So not much they can do. Another issue, I believe that there is a political maneuvering and there is a political pressure until reaching the presidential, the Ukrainian presidential elections
on the 25th
in
of May.
5 weeks. And that's actually definitely one of the cards that the Russians want to play, is to bring a pro-Russian president, no doubt. But the other issue also at the same time, trying to create the proxy armed groups, not themselves. This is not ours, it's buying time, buying further time. And that's not only from that angle. There is other issues. There is the Syrian card is still on the table. There are other cards on the table. There is the issue of
so you think that Russia is trying to leverage on the victories which they are achieving on the battlefield in Syria to have an upper hand in any potential negotiations or any possible negotiations with the West? They are trying to leverage on Syria?
In fact, the fact that Russia has annexed Crimea
is one point. Okay.
That has given
them leverage.
That has given a lot of leverage to the Bashar Assad regime in Syria, and
as
then
well.
encourage them as well. And that's why we see them, one part of it, one element is they have gaining military ground currently, and that they have giving them also, it's another signal maybe to other countries like in China for the claim.
They had gained military ground before the Crimea's referendum and after. But this might give further support, you think, to the Syrian government?
Further encouragement, further, if you want, momentum to the Syrian government because we have seen, it's been a long time that we have not seen, especially in Europe, territorial incursions and acquisitions of territorial. It was mostly in diplomatic. So after the Cold War, during the Cold War, we haven't seen that. So especially in Europe, I mean, that actually has sent a signal for the whole global positioning, for the whole global group of there is kind of a different game over there. And that actually, even right now, if you listen to the Russian separatists right now in Donetsk, they're saying, hey, we're giving May 11 as a date for referendum. So they are also asking to be treated the same like Crimea, if they want to go for a referendum.
Crimea was inspirational for them and for other regions in the world as well.
And that will be a domino effect for those more pro-Russian things.
Yeah,
but now the
de-escalation
de-escalation
model, which many states or many cities will try to imitate.
But why Russia is doing this right now? Because economically Russia's economy right now is deteriorating.
Let us talk about the economic factor, but I'd like to have to probe some of Mr. Akil's insights regarding one of the topics which you have mentioned. Do you agree, Mr. Akil, with Professor Mehanna's insights regarding the correlation between what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Syria? That Syria's victories are points on which Putin is trying to leverage and vice versa?
I totally agree with your esteemed guest because at the time that some people thought at the end of last year, November and December and the beginning of this year, some people thought that Russia, that the US is putting Russia in this situation, choose between Syria and Ukraine. But it was not the case, and it was proven because nothing has been changed in Syria. Nothing has been changed in the diplomatic, political, and strategic relations between Russia and Syria. It is exactly the opposite. Russia is now, Syria is important to Russia as Ukraine is important to Russia. Both of them are very important strategically.
Equally important?
What?
Equally important?
I think yes, equally important. Ukraine has some more advantage. It is a little bit maybe more important because it just shares borders. Yes, but as for example, as Sevastopol's port is a strategic access for Russia to the Black Sea, it is the same in Tartus in Syria, to the Mediterranean. So there are a lot of similarities here. And as your guest just said, Russia is getting stronger and stronger, not only military but economically. and with their cooperation with China, with
the other members of the BRICS countries. But out of the facial expressions of Dr. Mehanna, I think that he's skeptical about the strength, the economical strength which they have. So can you elaborate on this, Professor?
On the strategic priority, definitely he's right about the Tartus and the Black Sea, but economically, in fact, Russia is suffering economically right now. Its economy actually is deteriorating. The numbers actually say that. And in fact, they're trying to actually avoid the sanctions by saying, hey, if you want to put sanctions to us vis-a-vis Europe, 1/3 of your natural gas, actually, well, to Europe, 1/3 of your natural gas, we supply 1/3 of your natural gas. So Putin is telling them, I can't imagine how Europe will be living without natural gas. And 40% of that natural gas, of the 1/3, goes through Ukraine. And in fact, that's another leverage they can do it. But if you talk about China right now, it's taking a neutral side at the same time, hoping that it's going to get cheaper oil and cheaper natural gas from Russia. The US is pressing and playing the economic card. They're planning, if it doesn't go seriously with disarming the separatist illegal armed groups, they're saying, and vacating the buildings, and going with the diplomatic issue rather than the military issue, and this is the outcome of that. And that's what Obama told Putin, hey, we're willing and we're ready to increase the economic sanctions. These economic sanctions, actually, they're reaching a wider group of individuals. One of them is the Russian chief of staff. And things like that, actually, it's trying to make, even with the economic transitions, what made actually Putin recently with the BRICS saying, hey, maybe we have to have another World Bank for us.
He said it last
global
March
currency, exactly.
in the summit of
and
the
another
BRICS
global currency
March,
for all the transactions, international financial transactions.
They are not being represented in the World Bank, in the IMF, so they are calling for re-representation.
It's more like because the IMF and the World Bank, they think the West and specifically the US has a more influence on them. So they're trying to balance the hegemony and try to the BRIC having their another version of the World Bank, and therefore so all the international financial transactions do not have to go through New York and the American system of the dollar as a vehicle currency. But that easier said than done, which makes things Russia right now, it's not, you know, the economic situation is not really good right now.
But the EU is facing also many economic problems. They are still holding the burden of the post-crisis, which they have witnessed in the year 2007 and 2008. And Kiev needs a lot of support, and they are not able to provide the support for Kiev. So we have reached a dilemma, I guess, from this perspective. Do you think that?
There is a European economic recession right now, crisis. There's problem with that. In the aftermath of the 2000 financial crisis, everybody is still actually suffering. Still, China and Asia, Japan is actually picking up right now, doing well. The US is doing better right now. But in particular, so the financial aid right now, it's coming mostly from the US. But in terms of aids, in terms of aids, not military aid for the time being. But Europe, definitely, it's still suffering economically, including Russia as well. It's their economy is deteriorating.
Due to the sanctions?
No, not necessarily that. I mean, they lack some economic reforms. The whole global crisis actually
is high, maybe
very high, and there is actually, like I said, there is a lot of economic cooperation between Russia and the Europe. So if your partner is in trouble, you're also going to be economically in trouble. So.
Mr. Akil, many analysts have said that Russia might use its energy leverage over Ukraine and its economic leverage over Ukraine. However, Professor Mehanna has undermined a bit this leverage and talked about some weakness in the or some Achilles heels, if I might say, in the Russians' economy. Do you agree with him, or you have a certain counter argument?
From a close insight, I can say the following: Ukrainian economy is collapsing right now. The US dollar and the euro are 50% more than before. This is all because, first, the European Union and the United States couldn't afford anything to Ukraine. They promised a lot, and when there were negotiations between the Ukrainian government and the EU to sign the association agreement, Russia offered $15 billion as a debt to Ukraine. While the Americans, while the European Union also promised a lot, and they said that if Viktor Yanukovych would go, they will support Ukraine, and the new government, which was opposition at that time, said that if they would reach power, they will get a lot of aid, but they just got nothing. At the other side, Russia used a very strong economic pressure on Ukraine. And we can address this under the title of a new gas war between two countries. There was a lot of gas disputes between 2005 and 2010 between the two countries. Then they were ended.
We'll be talking about the gas dispute and the gas battle right after the last break. A break and we'll be back.
Okay.
Women's rights redefined.
The crisis of capitalism, the European impasse, the energy shortages, the emerging power of Asia, the economic power of the Arab world, the economic debate, informative, revealing, and progressive. It discusses the economic event of the world.
Economic debate, where the numbers reveal the truth.
Hello again to Global Insight. Mr. Akil, before the second break, I interrupted you. You were trying to elaborate on the issue of the gas battle and the gas dispute. Can you further elaborate on that, please?
Okay, just after the disputes, how they were ended, those disputes between Russia and Ukraine, everything was solved at an agreement. It was called the Agreement of Kharkov or Kharkiv. It was in 2010. This agreement stated that Russia will give Ukraine a 30% discount in gas prices and sell gas to Ukraine with low prices, and on the other hand, Russia will extend its rental to the port of Sevastopol from 2000, which was going to expire on 2017, and after the agreement, it will be extended to 2042, 25 years. So now, and after the new crisis and the new political battle, Russia is now asking, first they will stop this discount, and they are asking for $11 billion, which are debts that Ukraine should pay for Russia.
Yeah.
Because of the fact Russia is claiming now that this agreement doesn't work anymore, because this agreement, one part of this agreement was to rent the Sevastopol port. Now this port is already Russian. Russia do not have to rent this port because it is already Russian, and Sevastopol city is now a federal under the Russian Federation. So because of this, they say that this agreement is cancelled. And maybe also they will stop selling gas to Ukraine at all, and they will sell directly to Europe, and Ukraine will be buying gas from Europe, while before the gas, which forms about 1/3 of the gas consumed in the European Union, used to come from Russia to the European Union's countries and about 40% of it through pipelines, which passes in the Ukrainian soil. So this will drive Ukraine, and it is already driving Ukraine into a very deep economic trouble. Until the moment, no one is really helping, and I think Russia is, betting on this till the next elections. They are betting that the pro-European politicians and the new government cannot do anything and cannot get any aids from the European Union. It was just a big lie.
Yeah. I'll move back to Professor Mehanna. Professor Mehanna, what's happening in Ukraine is having global repercussions, especially that the global repercussions can be evident, especially after what we have witnessed yesterday, or what we have seen yesterday in the 4 hours interview which Putin had. He used repeatedly the term New Russia, referring to the cities in which disputes are taking place. Yeah. So what the global repercussions we might witness in the relationship between Russia and other countries in the world?
Getting back to what's been said right now, in fact, yes, trying first of all for Ukraine, let me say, we start from Ukraine, it's a heavy burden economically, asking them with 1 month, giving them a notice of 1 month to pay in cash for their gas in advance, to pay it in advance, and that's totally correct what's going on, and that's a heavy burden, and there is no global financial assistance to Ukraine. Taking it to another country, for instance with the US, what could be the repercussions from that issue if these things do not really materialize as far as de-escalating the Ukrainian crisis? What's going to happen actually is that more sanctions are going to be imposed on Russia. The EU are going to be hesitant. They prefer the diplomatic way because they have more economic cooperation and they have more at stake with Russia, unlike the US, which can is self-sufficient. They don't have much actually economic interests with Russia. However, there will be economic sanctions. These economic sanctions, unlike what has happened between the US and Russia during the Jimmy Carter's era, when they had the grain embargo on Russia, that there were limited actually liability on the US at the time, and it has worked. But now things has been changed. Now we live in a more global economic world. Now actually Russia, if anything is going to be regarding the oil and the natural gas and the energy sector of Russia, it's going to have actually a global repercussions on the whole economy. And that's something actually many countries going to actually wait and see, because we can't right now. It's very fragile, the world economy, for the time being. So we're not sure how efficient these economic sanctions will be. That's one. As if we talk about China, for instance, which is one of the largest economy right now and pulling the world in that respect. So there is an issue. Let's wait and see. They took in a neutral stand toward the annexation of Crimea recently, and however, they favor that. They favor it by principle because they don't want to. They prefer the kind of autonomy, not interfering in other autonomic territory. However, they have already a claim over Taiwan, but they can't do the same. The Putin move was so bold in their regard to allow for a referendum. They can't do that with Taiwan because a referendum issue will not be pro-China, for instance, or maybe in the Tibet as the same thing.
So they can't have an extremist stance with Russia, which is their ally.
But they have a big stake in that. They have a big stake because Russia, if you look at both, Russia is population deprived and resource rich, while China is population rich and resource deprived. So what China is actually seeking, cheaper natural gas, cheaper oil, for their economy, to fuel their economy.
Which can be offered by the West or by the US.
Or by Russia. They're taking that stand to be closer to Russia with the BRICS in the new era. So they're getting closer and closer to Russia, given that it's very important for them cheaper oil.
They have very close ties as well, economic ties with the US at the same time. So how can you explain this paradoxical view?
That's why a neutral, a neutral stand, but behind the scenes, they're more favorable toward being close to Russia, given also there is another two issues, the divergence on the Syrian issue, they are more closer in that, even on the Iranian issue, they have divergence with the West on these two issues, but behind the scenes, they don't want to confront the US from economic perspective and the West itself, but they favor the Russian way, hoping that they will get cheaper oil, cheaper natural gas, etc., which will be a good component for their economy.
Mr. Akil, is the New World Order put at stake, especially after the repercussions which Professor Mehanna has mentioned?
I think we are living now a very crucial point of the modern history, which we are actually, and certainly we are moving toward a new world order. But this term, new world order, each side is trying to implement this order in a different way. America, the United States, wants now to implement a new world order where it will deepen and strengthen its domination and its totalitarist rulership of the world. And at the other side, Russia and the BRICS countries, which will enter the battle, if a battle would occur, especially economically, they will enter this battle at one point, and they will try to implement their project of a new world order, of a multipolar world.
Yeah.
So yes, there is a new world order, but this battle and this conflict which we are living nowadays in the so-called Arabic Spring and now in Ukraine, this battle and the result of this battle will decide how this new world order would be implemented and how this term would be translated on the ground.
Do you fear any spillover from what's happening in Ukraine to neighboring regions maybe? And what are your anticipations until the 25th of May? You talked about escalation of the problem. What form will this escalation take?
This form, I don't think that things would take another shape of what we are witnessing now in the eastern and southern eastern regions. But those rebels will not leave their sites, they will not leave their locations, they will still be occupying the buildings, and it will be a message from Putin till the elections. Yeah. After the elections, as I said, there are three scenarios. I've spoken already about what if a pro-Russian and what if a pro-European president.
And the third scenario, briefly please.
The third scenario is a concessional president. This could happen, and I wish that this would happen if the United States...
But knowing Lavrov and Putin, do you think that they are willing to give concessions?
I don't know exactly. Days will answer this question. Just time will answer this question. There is one candidate. His name is Mr. Poroshenko. He didn't appear as a side in the political battle in the previous few months, and he's more like a businessman, and he's a very rich guy. People here prefer this man because they are tired of corruption. And people believe this may be true or not.
So
but they
he
believe
might
that
be the third scenario. Okay, just let me move for the last time to Professor Mehanna. The spillover, can you talk briefly about Western Ukraine, which the issue hasn't been tackled so much in the media?
Definitely,
your final thoughts, please.
Definitely the 2004, after the 2004 Orange Revolution and the disappointment that erupted from the corruption of the regime and from the not giving any critical reforms, even to the ethnic groups, basically the Russian natives and Russian speakers and other ethnic groups, that actually has created and led to some part of this. And the intervention from Russia took advantage of that. Now we have the issue of the southern eastern. I think there will be kind of maneuvering and pressure. Getting a president which is pro-Russian might be a point that's going to be,
this scenario,
or maybe like it was said, a neutral, an economic, a business perspective for them, but it's going to be more under the Russian influence, whether you like it or not. Now it's going to spill over, maybe, unfortunately, maybe there is a threat to the West. Although the Western part might be thought that it's not Russian speakers or whatever, but the issue of Ukraine, when it was actually after the dismantling of the Soviet Union, it was carved out from Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and the neighboring country, Hungary, I said, and Poland as well. So they might have the ethnic backgrounds with the Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia, and they might look there and they see that their economic life, they are well better off. And
so it might be inspirational.
They might be inspirational, calling for a referendum, for autonomy, and that's a spillover effect. So Ukraine is really in a very critical situation. And this is part of the new world also.
Your strategic insights, Dr. Rock-Antoine Mehanna, the Dean of the Faculty of Business Administration and Finance at Sajid University, and strategic analyst. These insights require further episodes. I hope to have you in future episodes of Global Insight. And I'd like to highly thank Mr. Majid Akil, who is a writer and political analyst who joined us from Ukraine for his deep interventions in tonight's episode. And as we have seen in this episode of Global Insight, the issue regarding Ukraine is highly controversial. My two guests had some opposing views, but there was consensus on the point that the problem will further escalate until the 25th of May. Until then, until 42 days from now, stay tuned to Global Insight. Thanks for watching.
We'll be discussing the lack of a solid legal basis for the management of oil fields and a revenue distribution mechanism in Iraq.
Iraq in general will benefit hugely from ratifying and approving the hydrocarbons law.
In the Constitution, just 2 articles directly deal with oil and gas.
One is